Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today in the United States is Thanksgiving. It's Thursday, November 28th. Today is day 419. I hope that you might be with your family, with loved ones, if you are in the US or wherever you may be, that your day is filled with love, with gratitude for the things that we have to be grateful for. This morning, pro-Palestinian protesters for the second year in a row blocked the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade in New York City. The demonstrators jumped barriers and ran onto West 55th Street just before 9:30 a.m. I think it was 21 people. It was less than 24 people were arrested, briefly interrupting the parade. That's how the day began. This is a summary of the week's news. I did not do a live briefing today because it is Thanksgiving in the US, but a summary of news from the past week in the Middle East, the most significant of which is the ceasefire agreement that has been reached between Hezbollah and Israel. It held, at least tentatively, last night, Wednesday night into Thursday morning. It began early in the AM yesterday. It's a 60-day ceasefire. The Israeli military is still in Lebanon. They're expected to withdraw in certain phases over the next 60 days, over the next 2 months. That will be coordinated with the Lebanese army. At the end, the only armed troops that will be between the Litani River and the South Lebanese border with Israel will be the Lebanese army and also UNIFIL, or UN peacekeeping forces. That's according to the ceasefire deal. So the Lebanese army and the Israelis are coordinating along with international oversight that is chaired by the US and also by France. There's a very specific and detailed plan. Hezbollah is also expected to withdraw from South Lebanon. The specifics of that are not yet clear. According to reports, Israel has killed or injured many members of the armed group's leadership and has destroyed many of their weapons stockpiles and factories. On Tuesday earlier this week, Israel struck 3 northern border crossings with Syria between Lebanon and Syria. This was for the first time. The Syrian state news agency reported 4 civilians and 2 soldiers killed. The IDF issued evacuation orders for Beirut. There were attacks between Hezbollah and Israel all the way up through the ceasefire agreement taking place, which just went into effect yesterday. Was the first full day, Wednesday morning. So all the way through Tuesday evening, there were attacks that were taking place. There were confirmations that dozens of Hezbollah targets had been hit on Tuesday. The U.S. will work with the Lebanese army to ensure compliance with the ceasefire, but the U.S. has said that they will not deploy combat troops to the area. The U.S., Israel, and Lebanon will also establish a joint monitoring and enforcement mechanism to ensure that the deal is upheld. Both Israel and Lebanon are able to report any violations. In the first 24 hours of the peace agreement, there were violations, but so far the ceasefire has continued to hold. The Prime Minister's office on Tuesday night claimed that the Biden administration had threatened Israel with an arms embargo and refusal to use the UN veto if a deal for the Hezbollah-Israel ceasefire was not signed. Washington denies the claims, but those claims came out of Netanyahu's office. The U.S. says that Netanyahu was a full partner in the agreement. Nonetheless, the war in Gaza may lead the Biden administration to take additional steps against Israel before Biden's term of office has ended. Hezbollah will remain active after its war with Israel ends, according to senior Hezbollah officials. And Lebanese by the thousands have already started to return home. So that happened some yesterday and today, Thursday, returning to areas that have been ruined by Israeli strikes, packing highways with cars that are loaded with people and belongings. More than 1 million people have been displaced in Lebanon since October of last year. The Lebanese army called for civilians returning to towns and villages along the border to avoid areas where the Israeli military is still present and in position. But the Lebanese have started to return to the southern border. Israelis on their northern border have been much more reticent. Some have started to trickle home to the north of Israel, but very few. Most are staying away until it's clear that the ceasefire holds. The Israeli government is not encouraging them to hurry back, at least not for now. The UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon, known as UNIFIL, I didn't know this. It's made up of about 10,000 civilians and soldiers from around 50 different countries. They are tasked with monitoring and reporting violations. Brett McGurk, who is President Biden's Middle East coordinator, met with the Saudi Crown Prince and U.S. Embassy in Riyadh yesterday, Wednesday, adding that the two had discussed both Lebanon and Gaza. The day before, on Tuesday, Mr. Biden said the U.S. is still working to normalize Saudi-Israeli relations, which the Crown Prince has said depend on the establishment of a Palestinian state. It was against that backdrop that the Lebanese army took the first steps towards reasserting control in the devastated areas of Lebanon by Israeli airstrikes in recent months, and those territories in South Lebanon that have been dominated by Hezbollah control in years prior. Some Hezbollah supporters are celebrating a ceasefire under the ceasefire agreement. I've talked about those specifics. Again, this agreement was based on the UN resolution that ended the 2006 war between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah will move north of the Litani River, which runs parallel to the Israel-Lebanon border. According to the Israeli National Security Institute, I wanted to give you some statistics of what happened over the last 13 months of fighting between Hezbollah and Israel. This is according to the Israeli National Security Institute. Israel claims at least 3,000 Hezbollah fighters have been killed. That's compared to 127 Israeli and foreign casualties on Israel's side, including 80 soldiers, 53 since the start of the ground attack, which was just recent, 68,500 Israeli evacuees from 43 settlements that the state ordered to evacuate, whereas there were 1.2 million evacuations in Lebanon. The damage to Israel is estimated to be 5 billion shekels, affecting 9,000 buildings in the north. 230,000 dunams were burned. I believe it's 4 dunams to an acre. Compared to damage in Lebanon of 30 billion shekels. So 5 billion shekels in Israel of damage, 30 billion shekels in Lebanon. Hezbollah has lost 80% of its missile capabilities and 70% of its drones. 19,500 rockets were launched from Lebanon to Israel. 19,500 compared to 13,000 Israeli missile strikes on Lebanon. So the capabilities, a rocket is not, I mean, we could go and study the ballistics, but a rocket is typically not as powerful as a missile, but 19,500 rockets, 13,000 Israeli missiles. Whereas the Lebanese news reported that 3,961 were killed. They did not differentiate between militants or civilians, 16,520 people wounded. And they said, for example, that just Tuesday before the ceasefire agreement was made, so the 26th of November, there were 78 people killed and close to 300 people wounded. So that's an update in terms of what has been going on in Lebanon. Moving on to Gaza, I wish that I could say that the escalations, the hostilities in Gaza have diminished. They have not. Save the Children just came out with a report in the last 48 hours called Missing Futures, the urgent need to protect Gaza's children and to safeguard their futures. The widespread destruction of Gaza has eviscerated infrastructure and services, eradicating a safe and healthy environment for surviving children to grow up in. It has resulted in lasting harm for all of Gaza's children, as the key elements that children need to survive, develop, and reach their potential have been systematically destroyed. The best way to protect children's lives and future is for an immediate, definitive ceasefire. Aid must be allowed to reach children and their families wherever they are. International law must be respected. We're calling for immediate intervention from the international community to stop further atrocities and protect civilians. All states must support accountability mechanisms to investigate and address potential war crimes. I just want to say Churches for Middle East Peace stands with Save the Children in that regard. I'd encourage you to look at that report called Missing Futures about the urgent need to protect children in Gaza. On Tuesday into Wednesday, as the ceasefire was being finalized, there were dozens of sites that were struck in Gaza. Israel claimed they were Hamas military infrastructure. The Israeli attacks killed at least 33 people and injured 134 more over that period. Over the last week, there have been winter rainstorms that flooded tent encampments of displaced Palestinians. There were at least 10,000 tents washed away or damaged. One Gaza resident was quoted in the news as saying, "Now the rain and the cold are killing us." Violent theft by criminal gangs are becoming the main obstacle to distributing supplies in South Gaza amid severe food shortages, aid workers and local residents have said. And Jordanian military planes this week dropped aid to North Gaza for the first time in 5 months. I could go on and talk about the death that has happened at shelters where people have been using schools, where people in the north continued to be isolated, where the lack of humanitarian assistance and food continues to be a problem. May I just say, Gaza continues to be a catastrophe. Israeli army radio quoted Al Arabiya this week saying that Egypt is seeking to renew ceasefire talks related to Gaza. Their proposal includes a civil administration that would be under the supervision of the PA. Both the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, and Hamas would agree to that. That's the proposal on the table by Egypt. In the official statement Wednesday, Hamas said it would cooperate with any efforts to bring an end to the war in Gaza, but it does have conditions, including the withdrawal of Israeli forces, the return of displaced people, and a real and complete prisoner exchange deal. Hamas has said it's still interested in playing a political role in Gaza, a condition which both Israel and the U.S. have rejected. Hamas believes that a wider regional war is its route to victory, and thus the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has not been good news for many in Hamas. In the West Bank, President Mahmoud Abbas, this is quite significant. This was, I don't believe, announced in Western media as of yet. This came out in both Israeli and Arab news sources this morning, Thursday morning. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, he's been subjected to immense pressure to step down from his position. Ynet, an Israeli news source, has said that Abu Mazen, Abu means father, Mazen is the name of Mahmoud Abbas's oldest son. Abu Mazen, so Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the PA, has announced his successor, Rohawi Fatua. Palestinian Authority President Abbas announced that if he is prevented from holding his position for any reason, Rahi Fatua will temporarily replace him for a period of 90 days until elections are held. Many in the PA were quite surprised by this move. He did not consult senior officials, Abbas, that is, especially Minister Hussein al-Sheikh, who has aspirations to be his successor. This move is seen as a result of both American and Saudi interventions aimed at changing the face of the Palestinian Authority, which, according to them, may also take control of the Gaza Strip after the war ends. Before Abbas's statement, 3 candidates had emerged as potential successors: Mahmoud al-Alul, Jibril Rajoub, and Mohammed Mustafa. Mohammed Mustafa is the current prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. I just had a meeting with him last week. Fatua has previously been sworn in as the acting president of the Palestinian Authority in 2004. That was November 11th, 2004. That was following the death of Yasser Arafat, until the elections were held, which resulted in the appointment of Abu Mazen, obviously, who currently is in that post. In Jerusalem, the mayor of Jerusalem encouraged Palestinians in the east of the city, East Jerusalem, that are in UNRWA schools to transfer their children to Israeli teaching curriculum schools. So that would be schools that teach in Hebrew. As of January 30th, UNRWA activities will be suspended. So students or parents are being encouraged to register their students in Israeli teaching curriculum schools in Jerusalem. In the West Bank, the IDF and the Shin Bet said that they intercepted a major shipment of weapons originating from Iran that were bound for, quote, terrorists in the city of Jenin in the West Bank, which included rockets, mortar shells, and explosive devices. There were further incursions and hostilities between the IDF and between militants in Jenin this week. In Israel, while claiming to be a non-discriminatory democracy, the Defense Ministry in Israel announced on Friday they will no longer use administrative detention. This means detention without trial against Jewish settlers in the West Bank. Instead, the Shin Bet will find other alternatives. As of November 1st, Israel is holding 3,451 suspects without detention. 8 are Jewish, the rest are Palestinian. 3,451 suspects are currently held under administrative detention. I just felt like that needed to be repeated. 8 are Jewish, the rest are Palestinian. And this week it was announced by the defense minister that administrative detention will no longer be used against settlers. At least 6 Israeli soldiers who fought for extended periods of time in either Gaza or Lebanon have committed suicide in recent months. There are not reports from the army that disclose the full number of soldiers who've either committed suicide or attempted to do so. So that's only a partial statistic. It was released in Hebrew News in Israel this week. A female Israeli hostage was killed in an area of North Gaza that was struck by Israeli forces, a Hamas spokesperson said last Saturday. A video of the killed hostage was released this past week. Israel says they're investigating that claim. A senior Israeli minister this week said that Israel will stay in Gaza for many years. There's quite a bit of contention about what will happen in Gaza from the Israeli government perspective. Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank are allegedly adopting tactics similar to those that have been deployed in Gaza, including using airstrikes and the use of human shields, the New York Times reported. I just want you to know, airstrikes in the West Bank, these types of tactics militarily have not been used since the Second Intifada, which has been 20 years, since the early 2000s. Iran has said that they're preparing to respond, quote, respond to Israel, end quote. A senior advisor to the country's supreme leader said in an interview this past week. And in Syria, forces opposed to the government of President Bashar al-Assad launched their largest offensive in years. 89 people were killed while overtaking a military base. Significant news on the international front. The International Criminal Court put out arrest warrants this week for Prime Minister Netanyahu, for the former Secretary of Defense, or the Defense Minister in Israel, that's Gallant. The ICC issued the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant for crimes against humanity and war crimes in Gaza. The court also issued an arrest warrant for a Hamas military chief, Mohammed Diaf. Israel claims that Diaf was killed in August, but the ICC has said that has not yet been substantiated. Netanyahu's arrest warrant was received in Israel by the government with great consternation. Countries around the world have had various different responses on how they might react if Netanyahu sought to travel there, on whether or not the countries would apply international law and how those arrest warrants might or might not be enforced. Of course, the United States was one of the leading voices supporting Israel, saying that the arrest warrants were unjust. France's foreign ministry strongly suggested yesterday that Mr. Netanyahu would not immediately be arrested if he came into French territory, despite an international criminal court arrest warrant accusing him of war crimes and crimes against humanity. There's significant legal reasoning for that. The Palestinian territories have signed on to the ICC, but my understanding is Israel has not. The UAE, there was a significant happenstance there that was horrific. There was a suspicion of kidnapping and the killing of a missing rabbi. Mossad was investigating the disappearance of Rabbi Zvi Kogan, a Chabad emissary of the UAE, on the suspicion that he had been kidnapped or killed. He had been missing since Wednesday a week ago, and it was announced in the last few days that his body was found in what was described as a heinous anti-Semitic terror incident. 3 suspects were arrested for his killing. The Israeli government said it was determined to be a terror attack, but no additional details were provided. The U.S. vetoed last week a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. They said that the ceasefire that was proposed at the UN Security Council was not contingent on the release of hostages, even though the mention of the release of hostages was included in the resolution. The U.S. Senate this last week blocked 3 resolutions that would have halted some U.S. arms transfers to Israel. This was, of course, Bernie Sanders' joint resolutions of disapproval. Roughly a third of Senate Democrats supported blocking the sales, underscoring party divisions. A U.S.-Israel panel will meet for the first time next month to investigate reports of civilian harm in the Gaza war, a State Department spokesperson said this week. And finally, as it's Thanksgiving, I've been thinking about what's it mean to have gratitude when, certainly for myself and for many of us in the West, we have so much abundance, even just water every day or a safe place to live or things that we might take for granted. What does it mean to have gratitude in the midst of war, in the midst of ethnic cleansing, in the midst of violence and death and ongoing destruction? And people around the world have been calling for prayers for Palestine, prayers for peace, as many in the United States are commemorating and acknowledging Thanksgiving. So my invitation is that you might join us at Churches for Middle East Peace as we seek to receive the peace of Christ, as we pray for the peace of the Middle East, of all of those in Palestine, in Gaza, in the occupied territories, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Israel, in all of the Middle East. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1-4 says, "First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for everyone, so that they may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and dignity. Might everyone have the opportunity to live in peace. May God continue to sustain us and all. May he go before us towards peace. In the name of Christ, amen."